This is rose quartz. Rose quartz is the pink variety of quartz. Rose quartz is always pink, but the shade of pink or how vivid the pink is matters. The pink can range from an almost white, just a little bit pink, to a medium rose color. The color doesn't get any better than a medium pink or rose color. There's no hot pink rose quartz. And the more pink the gemstone is, the more valuable it is. Most rose quartz, as in almost all rose quartz, is of a lower quality, meaning not facet grade. It has inclusions, it's not transparent, it has a sleepy look to it, and that doesn't mean that the lower quality rose quartz is not valuable. It is, but the rose quartz that of the lower quality is best suited for cabochons, for making beads, for beaded necklaces, or luckily for creating large carvings. It makes a great gem material for cabochons, beading, or carvings. But for faceting, rose quartz is rarely used, and that's because facet quality rose quartz is rare. Occasionally, facet quality rose quartz is available. A small amount of facet grade rose quartz has been found in Mozambique, in Africa, and that is where this piece of rose quartz came from. A few months ago, a small group of gem cutters and I traveled to Africa to visit some gem mines and to purchase gem rough directly from the sources. Our small group of facetors explored Kenya and Tanzania, but we didn't get to neighboring Mozambique, at least on this trip, maybe next time. And here's a link to those videos if you want to see an awesome gem hunting trip, if you're interested. Quartz is the most common mineral on Earth, and it comes in many different colors depending on which trace amounts of impurities gets mixed in with the quartz. Common colors of quartz include smoky quartz, which is kind of a dark brown or smoke color, and some smoke quartz is so dark that it's basically totally dark, and that's called sometimes black quartz. There's also rutile or rutilated quartz. That's not really a color, but it's definitely a separate category of quartz, and that's the quartz with needles of rutile mixed in with the quartz, and these rutile needle-like inclusions give rutilated quartz gemstones, beads, or carvings a stunning visual effect, and some of that is faceted. Next is clear quartz, and sometimes it's given a number of other names, often for marketing purposes. Sometimes it's called diamond quartz, rock crystal. Then there's yellow quartz or citrine, which can range in color from yellow to a vivid orange. And I enjoy cutting citrine, and I've cut a few stunning citrine gemstones. Then there is green quartz or praesiolite. There's blue quartz, but in my opinion, the king of quartz is amethyst, which is the purple variety of quartz. At one time in our history, the most valuable colored gemstones were ruby, sapphire, emerald, and amethyst. But as more and more locations of amethyst were found with large, vast quantities of amethyst around the world, amethyst became an abundantly available gemstone. The price dropped, and it kind of dropped out of the big three, ruby, sapphire, and emerald, and now tanzanite. But the beauty of amethyst has never dropped. Amethyst is one of my favorite gemstones. And finally, there's rose quartz. Which is one of the more common varieties of quartz, and it's found in very, very many locations around the world. And you can find large pieces for relatively low prices. But again, almost all of the rose quartz is of a grade that's suitable for carvings, making cabochons, etc., but only a very, very small amount is suitable for faceting. And also, quartz can be grown in a laboratory. Lab-created quartz can be manufactured into pretty much any color, or all colors. I mean, there is a rainbow quartz that's lab-created. It's available on the market. It has pieces that are of all colors of the rainbow, but rainbow quartz never occurs naturally. It's always lab-created. I used my 120 grit topper lap to preform this doorknob-sized gemstone. I could have used my trim saw, in which case I would have created a few trim pieces, leftovers of rose quartz that I could cut later, but since rose quartz is relatively inexpensive, especially smaller pieces, and because the trim pieces would have been fairly small, I chose just to grind away and preform this piece of rough into a trillion shape with my lap. I do tend to shy away from using my 100 series laps on most gemstones for fear of creating subsurface damage, which shows up later in the faceting process and is a problem. But quartz is a fairly hard gemstone, and I'm okay with using this rough lap in this case, and because the stone's so big, I needed a rougher lap to preform it. Now, the original piece of rough weighed in at about 135 carats or 26.9 grams. This is the trillion design that I will use to cut this gemstone. It was created by the late Jeff Graham, and he put it into the public domain for all cutters to try out. Jeff said that he was originally going to keep this design for himself, and thus the name Signature Number 4. In a previous video, I show you how to go back in time on the internet to the right date to see and download all of the 24 or so designs which Jeff had put into his now gone website. You can use this link here if you'd like to see the video and find out how to access all of Jeff's public domain designs, as well as read and download his numerous articles and tips for gem cutters. There's like a library full of data there. Okay, for our rose quartz, I'm going to orient the stone right like that at the and put the 96 index at the top of my my quill, and to me that looks like that'll get the our good trillion shape. It doesn't quite look right on this side, but I think this is best. But this is a massive stone, so close enough is probably close enough. Okay, I've preformed our stone, and I had to use a rougher lap so that because I had a lot of material to use. So I used a 120 grit topper. Toppers are fine at the very rough stages. Now I wouldn't use anything rougher than a 100 grit on a gemstone. When I was brand new, I bought a 60 grit lap. It was a solid steel crystallite, but I found that it causes subsurface damage to your gemstone. So you won't have any fractures or inclusions on your gemstone, and then when you use that 60 grit, when you get to your finer grits, suddenly you see cracks or inclusions, and you didn't see it when you examined the stone before. Again, that was from using too rough of a lap on the gemstone. So 120 grit topper is about as rough as I'm going to go. Now I'll go over it with a probably a 240 grit topper. Okay, I went over my rose quartz with my topper laps to preform it. I started with a 120 and then went to a 240 and then a 320. And for a 120, I'm just looking at a 100 series topper, because toppers are relatively inexpensive. They're kind of disposable laps for me. So anything that I find in the 100 series, a 120, a 150, I'll buy that. So in this case, it went 120, 240, and 320, but anything in those series was fine. And the reason I worked through all three is I had to bring the pavilion down a little bit to get rid of a crack on the edge here, but by bringing the pavilion down, that got rid of it. Or I could have brought the sides in, but that would have made the stone smaller, and I wanted the stone to be as big as possible, so I brought the sides in. After my 320 grit topper, preformed it, then I went straight to the 600 grit. In this case, I used another topper, and this is the finish I get with a 600 grit topper. So now I'm working on the 3 facets on the first row in the pavilion with my 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap, and I'm just moving them a little bit. So I will go over this facet next. So I get a speed of about 500 RPMs on my Ultratech. And I don't have to move the facet much. I need an angle of 45.85. So I'm just going to move it 1 degree and clean up the scratches from my 600 grit topper. And that's the finish I get with my 320 grit diamond on a bat lap. And you can tell I moved the facet down just a little bit because now the angles are a little bit wider than the width of the girdle facet, and I'll clean those up with the other facets. But I just moved it down a little bit because all I needed to do was polish out any scratches from my 600 grit lap. So now I'll go to the next row, the P2 line of instruction, and cut polish six facets, the 2 on each side of this one facet. I'm ready to start pre-polishing the girdle with my 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap. But before I do that, I'm going to do a trick that works sometimes, depending on the size of the stone. I'm going to change the angle. The girdle's cut at a 90 degrees, so anything higher than 90 degrees will start cutting out here and kind of work its way in. So I'm going to change it to, say, 92.5 degrees, and I'm going to cut away up to somewhere about here, and that will leave this at this part with a 90 degree angle. And I only need the girdle to be, say, 0.5 millimeters wide. The width of the girdle is not agreed upon in the fasting community. Some people say it should be 0.5 millimeters. Some people say it should be 0.3 millimeters. A few say 0.2. Some say it should be a percentage of the width. But anywhere, I shoot between 0.3 and 0.5 millimeters for me. You need some type of a girdle for your jeweler to mount the prongs onto and mount the piece. And if you don't have a girdle where the pavilion here at the bottom touches the crown, the upper half, you have what's called a knife edge. And the problem with that is it's easy to chip. So since I only need to polish 0.3 to 0.5 millimeters, again, I'm going to use a rougher topper lap and just cut away at a slight angle. And again, 92.5 is what I'm going to use, but it all depends. So you use the same index gears as with the 90 degree when you cut the girdle. So for these facets, it's the 96, 32, and 64. And then these 6, and then these 6, 2 on each of the 3 sides. So again, I changed my angle to 92.5, which will cut away the back side along the girdle. And you want to make sure that your quill does not touch the lap, or you're gonna grind into your quill. And you want to make sure you're clear here of hitting your splash guard. So everything's looking good. So we're just going to cut until we get about 0.5, a little more than 0.5 left on the girdle. So you can see where my topper is cutting right here, and I just walk this line up probably to somewhere around here, and that way all of this part here I don't have to bother with as I pre-polish, and I'll pre-polish and polish a much smaller facet, which will go a lot easier. So I'll continue to grind away some of this at the 92.5 angle. Okay, that was quick and doesn't have to be exact. So as I pre-polish these facets on the girdle, the lap won't touch these because these angles are cut kind of in a little bit, 2.5 degrees. So I'll only be polishing and pre-polishing these small areas right here instead of a facet this big, which would take a lot more time to cut and polish. Again, it works sometimes, it helps sometimes. It's not that important in a small stone, but I find in larger stones it's very helpful. So now I'll continue to pre-polish the girdle. Finished polishing the pavilion, or the bottom half of our rose quartz. So now I'll put it in the my transfer fixture, and we'll be ready to cut the crown, or the upper half. And this polished with my cream white lap and a cerium oxide. Okay, I've finished cutting all the facets on the upper half of our rose quartz, and I used my 12M, M for Mills lap, which is about a 1500 grit lap. It was made in the Ukraine, so they used mill instead of grit. So it does a really good job. It's a sintered lap. Haven't used it in a little while, so I took it out just to make sure it still works out fine, and it does a great job. So those are all the facets on the upper half. Now here at the very top, what I did is this final facet, the C5 before the table, is at an angle of 21.3 degrees, and you cut the 96, 32, and 64 teeth, the 3 teeth around the stone. So after I pre-polished those, then I went back and changed the angle from 21.3 to something less. You don't want to go to 0 degrees on your Ultratech with your mask without the table adapter or something else. It could damage your mask, but near 0 is fine. So I went to 15 degrees, 21.3 to 15 degrees, and I took my 600 grit topper and cut these 3 facets. The same facets, the same 96, 32, and 64. And what that did is it instead of this facet being all the way up to here, by moving it in with the 600, when I come back and polish and pre-polish and polish these facets, I won't have to polish the top part. So almost half the facet I won't have to pre-polish or polish, which will save a lot of time. And again, all that will get cut away when I cut the table, because the table is going to cut down to just touching here and here and here on the top. Finished polishing all the facets on the upper half of our stone, the crown, with 8000 grit diamond on a bat lap, and that's all these facets from this line on down. And now I'll polish. I'm going to use the tin lap and a cerium oxide bat stick. See how that works out. Okay, I finished polishing the upper half of our gemstone, so now I'm going to take the stone out of our quill and set up the quill to cut the table, and then we'll be able to weigh and measure the stone. I finished polishing up the table, and I used my tin lap with cerium oxide, and so now I'll soak our rose quartz in acetone to remove it from the top, then we'll weigh it, measure it, and send it off to BOPIE. Today I cut a whopper of a gemstone using rare facet grade rose quartz, and by rare I mean that facet grade rose quartz is rare. Rose quartz itself is very abundant in all sizes up to boulder size, but clean, clear rose quartz with excellent color, almost like the color of a rose flower petal, is rare. This piece of rough was kind of trillion shaped when I got it, so I went with my favorite trillion design, Jeff's signature number 4. Rose quartz cuts and polishes the same as quartz, which I find easy to cut and polish, but I do know from some other fasteners that they find quartz sometimes difficult to cut and polish. But please let me know in the comments what you think of this design and of the final gemstone, and if you've cut this design yourself in any gem material, please drop me a note on Facebook and let me know how it turned out for you. And again, photos are always welcome. And as always, happy fasting, everyone.